Hello, this is Sandra, and I wanted to discuss. Okay, so lately, what I've been seeing, I guess I could say probably in my office, in my practice, and outside of my practice, because even some personal friends or acquaintances, it's the theme of when women leave their husbands, and anyways, they end up regretting it. So and the reason I wanted to discuss this is because hopefully if you watch the video, maybe you can maybe take more time to think about like if it is the right move to leave your husband, or if there's other things that you can do. There's other things that you can do before you make that decision. And I definitely recommend to do everything that you can to try to save the relationship before you make the choice to leave. And when I say to leave, I mean to pursue a divorce. And I mean, of course, there's exceptions. Like if there is chronic cheating, or sometimes, I mean, I'm even seen some couples where there was probably cheating almost throughout the whole marriage, and this is probably a 20-year relationship. So I'm not talking about those extreme cases, or if there's domestic violence or abuse, and you know you're getting abused and it's actually scary, and the reason you're probably not leaving is because you're scared to leave. Okay, those are probably the ones that you do. Sorry, that was my alarm. Those are probably the ones that you do need to leave, uh, and probably need to work yourself up to be able to do that and do a plan and all that stuff. So just to say, I am not talking about those. I am specifically talking about the ones where it's pretty much the wife, and I'm referring more to women on this one, because I've been seeing more of a trend where it's women that have been doing this one. I've been noticing, I mean, throughout my years of practice, I have also noticed that it's more women seeking divorce. Um, Most of the time, men don't frequently seek as much divorce, but I will say sometimes when they have, it's I mean, not always, but I have seen more frequently when they are having an affair, and pretty much even the person that they're having an affair with is probably pushing them to do that. Because even then, sometimes I see men don't even want to get a divorce even though they're having an affair. So that's been my experience. I know there's a lot of other experiences out there. There's exceptions. Um, okay, so but I specifically just want to talk about that one topic of where women want to leave, and there's not necessarily these big, huge issues like infidelity or domestic violence. Another one would probably be narcissistic personality disorder, which that one's probably a little harder to dissect. And that one I would actually recommend to go to a therapist or to counseling and just kind of figure out. Sometimes it's kind of hard to see when you're in it. So if you suspect that your spouse might be a narcissist, even then you might not even have to leave. Yes, and I know I'm probably gonna get a lot of criticism for this, because it also depends on degrees of narcissism. It's a spectrum. I mean, some are, yeah, pretty selfish, but they're harmless. And then there's some, like, probably leaning a little bit more towards the psychopathic side, and those are probably the ones you want to leave. Um, okay, so back to the topic. I get stuck on these rabbit trails. So, okay, the reason I wanted to discuss that is because since I've been noticing that trend, most of the time I've been seeing that it's the husbands really aren't. I don't think, okay, in my judgment, the problems haven't been enough to merit leaving. I feel like there's probably some efforts that could have been done before the wife made the decision. But I feel like the wife usually makes this decision after there's been so much buildup of resentment. Um, and then, once they're separated or divorced, and now they've had a lot of space and time to be able to think clearly, um, many times it's almost a little too late. The husband has moved on with someone else, and the wife has even moved on with someone else, and now they're not satisfied with their new relationship. Um, and I'm telling you, I've been seeing this trend of regret. Sometimes even years later, of like, why didn't I just try a little harder? So just to kind of help you prevent this, I definitely suggest reading Boundaries. Okay, Boundaries is one of my favorite books, and I pretty much recommend it to all my clients, even the ones that aren't even coming to couples therapy, because there's even boundaries with kids, boundaries with marriage, and these books are by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. They are great. And the reason I recommend these is because, okay, if you want to start making changes in your relationship, it has to start with you. And boundaries has to do with changing your behavior, changing what you tolerate, what you don't tolerate, being able to say yes, being able to say no. But most people actually think boundaries is actually about the other person. And it really isn't. You're not trying to control the other person, you're controlling yourself. For example, a boundary where you're controlling yourself is, let's say your spouse is yelling at you. Um, Most people think, okay, I'm setting a boundary by telling him, stop yelling at me. And yes, I guess you can say that that's a boundary. But really, a more clear and better boundary is, you don't tell the other persons to stop yelling at you, but you just say, you know what, I'm going to remove myself from this situation. As long as you're yelling at me, I am not going to listen to you, and I'm going to leave the room. And of course, like I said, I'm saying this is in a relationship where it's not dangerous to do that. Obviously, I know that there's been some situations, if the person tried to do that the other person would get violent. So I am definitely not talking about those situations. So that is what a boundary is about, where you're controlling your behavior. You're not trying to control the other person's behavior. And I feel like people that don't have boundaries kind of struggle with knowing what a boundary is until they figure out what it is. And then it's almost like you can't unsee it anymore. It's like those pictures, with like, is it the witch and the rabbit? Or I think it's like a young lady and an old lady. And then once you see both, it's almost hard to unsee any of them. So it's like once you see it, you just see it all the time. But while you're still blinded and you're not seeing it, it's almost like it's almost impossible to see boundaries. I have noticed a trend that once people start setting boundaries, they actually start getting really angry and start seeing boundary violations everywhere. And it's going to be a transition, even with setting boundaries with people that you love. They might not like it. They're probably not used to you saying no. And saying no is such a wonderful thing. Being able to say no and not caring what the other person thinks. And I'm not saying like be careless and like you don't care about other people, but not being so sensitive, or not saying yes even though you're going to resent it just for the sake of the other person, or because you're afraid that the other person's going to get mad. There is some sort of empowerment when you learn how to say no, and you're not scared if the other person gets angry or not. And you're not saying yes compulsively just so the other person doesn't get angry. Okay, so the way to kind of prevent this, I would say, try to seek counseling. Try to do everything you in your power before you make that decision. And really seek the counsel of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the counselor. Okay, so what I tell a lot of women, because a lot of the resentment usually comes when the woman is very focused on the children and then they're doing all the housework. And then the husband comes home and he pretty much, just sits down, watches TV, doesn't really help out with the kids. Okay, so, and then, so anyways, they don't like that. So they end up getting a divorce. And, and guess what? Now they have to, now after the divorce, they have to do everything anyways. On top of being a single mother and having to work, a full-time job to be able to keep up with being able to raise the kids, and now having and now the kids are really not getting the attention that they were getting before from the mother. It's almost like it went from full attention from the mother completely focused on them to now they have to seek a full-time job. And see, the reason I think that a lot of people regret it is because guess what? Now you're having to do both. So my advice has been to all these women, when they're growing resentful because the household chores aren't being divided up equally, is what, why don't we just try to pretend that you're a single mother? Because if you were a single mother, who would be doing all the housework? You, right? And yes, I can almost see the comments. How dare you? And he should be able to work around the house. And yes, I'm not saying it's not fair. And you might want to, oh, actually I have it in Spanish, but I also recommend, there's a link, I would Google it, and it's called Cognitive Distortions. And there's one called Fallacy of Fairness. And those are all wrong ways of thinking. The one that I really like is the one from Psych Central. And I'm still trying to figure it out, but I'll try to link it inside the description. And the one I was telling you about is Fallacy of Fairness, is wrong ways of thinking that actually, if you keep thinking this way, it's actually going to make you more miserable. So if you get rid of these ways of thinking, you'll actually be a happier person. And the one I'm referring to here is the fallacy of fairness, wanting things to be fair. And that's why, just holding on to wanting things to be fair, that's why so many women get upset that the household chores aren't divided up equally. Or he's not helping enough, because you're starting to see that you're doing way more housework than he is. And yes, I am all for husbands helping out, but if they're not helping out, are you actually better off with the alternative of getting a divorce? And most of the time, the answer is actually no. You're not better off that way. You're not better off being a single mother and still having to do all the chores anyways. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, you have a husband that's providing, and he is allowing you to be able to stay at home and be able to actually do all these household chores. And this is also a biblical principle. Because, and look, because I've struggled with that too. I'm not saying that I'm just always happy to do all the chores and stuff. And, sometimes I will ask, like, hey, will you help me out with this? And if he doesn't want to, it's okay. And most of the time he actually does. But, like I had stated in a previous video, you need to learn how to ask. And asking is actually asking, as in the person can say no. Another question that I ask a lot of my clients is, okay, so if you ask your husband to do a chore for you, and they say no, are you going to get angry? And most of the time, the answer is yes, I'm going to get angry because I do this and this and this and all these like million things. He needs to be able to tell me. He needs to be able to do that chore for me. And to me, I'm like, okay, well then that really wasn't a question, was it? It was more of a demand. And who wants to be bossed around, especially in a marriage? So see, even that one's a lack of boundaries. And see, the reason people, especially women, have trouble accepting a no is because they never say no. So it's almost like this intrinsic thing of, well, if I don't ever say no, then no one has the right to tell me no either. But the other one's actually, the flip side's actually better. It's, I can tell you no, but you can also tell me no. And guess what? You're going to do everything with a more cheerful heart when you take that attitude, as opposed to kind of a sense of entitlement, as in, if I do everything for you, and if I finally ask you for a favor, then you need to tell me yes. And see, those are the types of, I'm not going to want to do a favor for you if I feel like I have to do it. It's hard to love something that you have to do, that you kind of see that you have to do it. And usually that's where resentment grows and all that. Okay, so when I have struggled with this, because I'm not gonna lie, I have struggled with it, and that's why I know how to overcome it. And to be honest, ladies, it's always going back to the Word of God. And so this is a verse that I usually go to whenever I'm starting to feel a little resentful and like, okay, he hasn't been helping me. And see, those are the thoughts that you also want to get out of your mind. Because once you start going down that trail, guess what? Once your husband comes home, let's say you start going down that thought trail an hour before your husband gets home. Guess what's going to happen when he gets home? You're going to be super angry. You're going to work yourself up into being super angry. So it's just better to not even go there. Like, it's not going to benefit you. It's not going to benefit the kids. It's not going to benefit your husband. You're just going to put yourself in a bad mood. And at the same time, is it going to make him do chores? Probably not. Remember, you can get more, I don't know, how does the saying go? Like, can lure more flies with honey than with vinegar. I don't know. Anyways, I don't know how the saying goes, but you can look it up. So I'm going to read Colossians 3, and it's 23 to 24. And it says, whatsoever ye do, do it heartily as to the Lord, and not unto men, knowing that of the Lord ye shall receive the reward of the inheritance, for ye serve the Lord Christ. So when you start getting this attitude of, I'm the one that does everything, do it as unto the Lord. And I mean, really, that is what God's calling you to do. I can actually recall early in my marriage. Okay, so I was not that great when we first got married. And I remember being really angry with my husband. He had, to be honest, at the moment, don't recall what we had fought about. And I remember getting home, I'm making dinner, and I'm telling myself in my head, I'm probably clanking pots and pans, being really loud because I was so angry. And, I had to make a statement, and he already knew. I don't know why I was trying to make it more obvious. So anyways, I remember saying, like, in my mind, I'm like, oh, and he better not even think that I'm going to serve him. And then I hear in my mind again, serve him. And I'm like, no. Like, after what he did to me, like, the reason I'm so angry is because of something he did. And I'm kind of arguing with myself, and I'm like, no, like, I'm not going to do that. And then I hear it again, serve him. And then I kind of pause, and I'm like, I don't want to. And why am I talking to myself? And then that's when I realized, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, that is God talking to me. And when I realized that, I was like, oh, it wasn't an immediate yes. And I was like, oh, I really don't want to. And it's really an understatement for me to say that I had pride. It was actually very difficult for me to apologize. I didn't grow up that way. Um, I mean, it almost felt like an impossible task. So I was like, I don't want to. And I remember kind of just like wrestling with the idea of serving him. And then I hear it a third time. And it says, serve him, but do it for me. I mean, immediately after that, I'm like, okay, this is no doubt God talking to me. And I was like, oh, why? Like, why did you have to do it for you? Like now, I mean, I grew up in church. I was kind of like a little Pharisee. I wanted God to approve of me. So I was kind of legalistic. So I was like, oh, and I mean, it was, to be honest, it almost felt like an exorcism just to try to get myself to serve him. And I was like, oh. And you know what? I served the plates, both of them, one for me and one for him. And I probably stood there, to be honest, I don't know how long I stood there, but the food probably got cold. I actually remember it was tilapia fish with the salad and rice. And then I finally worked myself up to finally serve him. And I bring the plate to him. And he was so gracious. I bring the plate to him and I'm like, here, babe. Probably not as nice. I'm like, here. Probably like that. Because I just, have attitude. And then he's like, oh, babe. He's like, I didn't think you were going to serve me. I thought you were going to be too angry. Ladies, the anger just completely washed away. It just completely left. Like, I didn't even have an ounce of anger. And I'm like, oh, no, I wanted to serve you. And it was probably maybe 3 weeks or a month later that I told him what actually happened. I told him, to be honest, I actually didn't want to serve you. The Holy Spirit was imploring me to serve you. And I actually struggled with it. Anyways, at that time, we actually laughed about it. Anyways, and I'm so glad God did that for me. And the funny thing is, I remember praying that I wanted to be a good wife for a long time. And then when he was actually trying to help me out, I didn't want to listen. And okay, so I don't know if y'all read the story of Moses. And you know when God's calling Moses to, like, hey, I want you to go to Egypt, and then Moses like, I can't, I stutter, and all this other stuff. And I remember reading the story, and I'm like, who would tell God no? Like, what is wrong with Moses? And then yet I found myself, like, when the second time I heard serve him, and at that time I knew it was God, I was still finding myself saying, I don't want to. But anyway, so it kind of made me understand Moses a little bit better. But anyways, so all that to say, ladies, like, a lot of times just putting some extra effort, changing your attitude towards your husband. Sometimes if he's not helping out with household chores, you know what? Hey, he's providing an income. It would actually be way worse if, he's not providing anything. And I'm not saying you can't ever get upset, but really getting upset is it's not really gonna help all that much. And of course, you're free to make whatever decision you want to make. This video is just so you can stop and probably think a little bit deeper on if this is the right decision for you. And if you find that once you change your attitude, he might actually be even more willing to do stuff for you. Because, who likes getting bossed around? So, I would say try this strategy first. I know some women probably don't want to try it, and that's okay. But it's gonna be, maybe it's gonna be your loss. Uh, but I don't think it hurts to try. And especially if you've been married for 20, 21 years or 10, 15 years, like how much is 6 more months of trying? And then just to see if things will change. And remember, the point isn't to try to make the other person change, but maybe they will because you change. Because I kind of see marriage like gears, the little, I don't know, like the watch gears or whatever. Um, once one gear changes and the other one doesn't fit, is well, in order for the other gear to kind of work with you, they have to change too. And usually that's what tends to happen. When one person changes, then the other person changes. But I wouldn't go in with that purpose of, well, I'm going to change just so the other person can change. Because really, the purpose of changing for ourselves is going to be for our benefit. I mean, automatically changing our attitude is going to change your happiness. You're already going to be happier despite nothing in your surroundings, despite your husband not helping you more, despite your kids not helping you more. And I will say, and this is probably for another video, but do try to make your kids do household chores. Because you do want them to grow up to be responsible adults. And I will do a whole other video, but I will say this one last thing about the kids. With the kids, the more you put them to do household chores, the irony is that they actually grow up to be more grateful because they see the work that goes into what you're doing for them. If they actually get a little bit of that taste of having to do some of the work themselves. I remember trying to teach, I don't remember if it was my oldest or my middle one, and some math problem or something. And I remember getting kind of frustrated because they weren't getting it. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to have to step away just so I don't get too frustrated. So, and they could see the frustration. And then since I was getting frustrated, they were also getting frustrated too. And I remember my middle one was trying to teach my little one something. And I really don't even recall what it was, but it was something about homework. And my little one wasn't getting it. And my middle one was getting so frustrated. Like he started raising his voice and he's like, this is how you do it. And then, and it's funny because he recognized and he said, oh, like this is why you were getting frustrated with us. And he, like, instead of judging or getting frustrated with himself, I was actually really proud because he kind of looked back and just kind of gave me some grace, just because he had tried it on his own and he was also getting frustrated. And instead of, in the time when I was getting frustrated, he was kind of feeling bad for himself and probably just like, I don't know, maybe even thinking my mom's so mean or something. But it was actually kind of amazing to see him recall that moment and be like, oh, like, no wonder you get frustrated too. Like it is kind of a frustrating thing, especially when you're trying so hard to explain something. But anyways, all this to say that really, ladies, I want you to really think about it, to really consider it. Maybe trying to change your attitude, maybe giving a timeline before you actually make a decision. That is something that I tell all my clients. I say at least give it another 6 months where you try something different, not letting the resentment grow. Another thing is actually, telling him your grievances. Like, hey, you know what? I don't like that whenever you come home, blah, blah, blah. And do I statements, Just whenever you do this, I feel this way. And then that way you're not accusing him. You're not like, well, you're so selfish. No, you can say, whenever you come home and don't acknowledge me, I feel like you don't care about me. And see, that one's kind of harder to get defensive because you're not accusing him. You're just saying, when you do this, I feel this way. So there's a lot of little things that you can do that can change even the other person's attitude. Because when you go in accusing, the other person's going to get defensive right away. I mean, it's just a natural instinct. Even knowing full well, kind of being educated on it, it doesn't keep me from getting defensive. Like, I have to pause a little bit, but my initial reaction when somebody accuses me of something is to get defensive. But then I kind of, throughout the years, it's been kind of training, and I pause and I'm like, okay, no, don't get defensive. Like, really listen to what the other person is trying to say, and maybe they didn't communicate it in the best way. And maybe we can even talk about that, like, hey, I hear what you're saying. I didn't really like the way you told me. But, I do understand. I can see why you're frustrated or whatever. And see, all those things take practice. Throughout the years, it just becomes easier and easier if you keep practicing it. In the very beginning, it almost seems impossible. So this is what I implore to you all, ladies. Please, please try to do all these things before you actually make such a drastic decision to leave. Especially because I've seen the repercussions of families breaking up because they let their feelings and resentment and all those feelings get in the way. And then it actually turned out that it's actually, they're worse off. They're worse off. And I mean, and I'm talking about deep regret, what I've been seeing. It's not like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have, I don't know, like if you forgot something at the store, oh, I wish I would have, no, it is deep regret. Like, if you see it, it's actually really sad. It's heartbreaking. So that is why I implore you ladies to do this. And to be honest, I think the enemy is just after marriages and families in general. So please don't let the enemy win. And another book, I recommended Boundaries. And another book that I also recommend, and I really like this one. It's called, let me see if we can see it. Maybe it's backwards, I don't know. It's Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas. And the whole premise of this, let me see if I can find it. And the reason I really like this is it's not because it's like a to-do book. Like, do this to save your marriage. It's more of how to change your attitude towards your spouse. And when you do change your attitude, it just changes the way, it just changes your behavior towards him. Once your attitude changes, everything flows out of that. And that's why I like more things that change your mindset versus this is what you need to do in a marriage. Let me see. You know what? I'm going to have to look for the verse. I can't exactly find it. But it pretty much does the whole premise on this one verse, and it's pretty much the whole book. Okay. So the premise of pretty much this book is based on James 3:2. Well, at least that's my opinion. I don't know. You could probably ask the author, and he's like, no, that is not it at all. But anyways, the way I read it was based on James 3:2. And it's, we all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect able to keep their whole body in check. So that's just to kind of show that we all make mistakes, that we all stumble. So if we all stumble, then that's going to change the attitude that we have towards other people, and especially our family and our spouses. So I definitely recommend this one. So remember, do everything as unto the Lord. And when you start growing yourself resentful, no, you fight those thoughts with the word. And God does command to do change your thoughts, to, what's that verse that says, hold your thoughts captive, as in you have to bring your thoughts to obedience. Actually, instead of me, let me look it up. Okay, so this other verse is 2 Corinthians 10:5, and it says, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. Okay, so see, God is telling us that we need to rein these thoughts in. So whenever we start going down that trail where we just start pretty much, I don't know, throwing our husbands under the bus, think on these verses. Think on the one that we all stumble in many ways. Do everything as unto the Lord. And I would even recommend getting some note cards, writing these down. And whenever you start feeling, and your body tells you, because all of a sudden you start feeling, like when you start feeling angry, your heart rate starts going. So whenever you start feeling that way, just bring it unto the Lord, or start reading those verses and meditating on those. Just like the word says, to meditate on his word. And that's how faith grows, because there's another verse that says faith comes from hearing, and hearing the word of God. A lot of times people try to build up their faith, but it's almost like a physical exertion. Because I remember trying to have faith for things, and I was like, oh, it's like I would pray really hard, but that is really not how faith works. I feel like there's a lot of video, a lot of material that I want to cover, but I'm just going to leave it at that right now. And if you have any questions or anything or comments, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to get all the ones, the exceptions of why this isn't going to apply to them. And you know what? You do not have to take my advice whatsoever. And you can also skip through this video if you don't like anything that I'm having to say. But anyways, so that is it for today. I will see you guys next week. And if there's any other topics that you want to cover or any questions, I can try to best cover them, and just hit me up on the comments. Thank you. Bye.